Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion with your sister, Dr. Ma'at, and your Brother T. Wolo. So, family, tonight we are discussing chapter 4 of Booker T. Washington and Africa, The Making of a Pan-Africanist by Dr. Tyrene Wright. She will be joining the panel shortly. She told us last week. I don't know if any of you caught the discussion last week, but she said it was a lot to unpack in chapter 4, which it is. And by the way, chapter 4 focuses on um, Booker T. Washington's relationship and work with African nationalists and Pan Africanists. And it was a lot that she discussed in this particular chapter. By the way, she's backstage. Brother T, go ahead and introduce yourself before I bring Dr. Wright on.
Hello, family. How you doing? My name is Brother T. Been with the Read Book Club for like 3 books strong so far. I look forward to the conversation, and I hope that you enjoy what we're putting out this book season.
At T, you gotta tell them about JT Coins now.
All right, guys. My name also go by JT Coin Rings. JT Coin Rings is a channel that I take precious metals, our silver and gold coins, and I turn them into rings that we can wear. I believe this adage that we say in the stacking community: if you don't own it, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. You gotta hold and own your own precious metals. That's one thing about inflation. So what I do in this channel is just show the process of me turning coins into rings. And soon I'll put content on what we can do in order to start collecting for ourselves and also our children.
All right, family. So I'm gonna bring brother. I said brother. I'm gonna bring on Dr. Tyrene Wright. I'm gonna bring her on now, family, so she can introduce herself. And this is the author of the book that we've been reading. This sister has put in a lot of work, family. She's been studying Booker T. Washington for years. Okay, and it shows in how thorough her information is, family. In the book, and I've been posting clips, Brother T, on Instagram, and people are like, I gotta get the book, Dr. Mott.
Yes,
Where
I
can I get
saw.
the book? Brother, shout out to Brother Omar Wiley, Africa. He called me on Friday. He said, Doc, you're becoming the conscious Oprah, because when you tell people to go get books, they're running to get the book. So
That's awesome, though.
yeah, and I think it's beautiful to actually have the author. Like this is the first
Yes.
time this has happened, Brother T. Am I correct? Like to have the
Yes.
actual author come on and explain, certain things to us. And so it's just an honor to have her. I'm bringing her in right now. Dr. Wright, you are on the screen and you are live.
Hello, how are you?
Fine,
Hello.
Doc. How about yourself?
I'm well. I was looking forward to this.
Awesome.
We were looking forward to having you, and I was so happy that you could, accommodate us. I have another panel discussion at 7 p.m. To
Mhm.
speak about STEM education. And so
Okay.
I said, oh man, I really want to do both. So I was praying that Brother T and that you would be, flexible, enough to have the discussion earlier than planned. Brother T, what you want to
Sure.
say?
I just want to make sure that I say when Dr. Ma'at sent me that message, I said, make sure you talk to Dr. Tyrene
He
Wright
sure did. He
because
sure
she said
did.
she wanted to be on to discuss this chapter. I wanted to make sure that you was able
He
to
sure
give
did.
you
Yes,
yes.
yes.
He sure did. He sure did. He said she remember last week she said she's coming on, so make sure you
Right.
talk to her. I said, okay. And as soon as I hung up with you, as soon as you and I stopped texting, I sent her a text message and she's like, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. She's like, I'll be through. No problem. No problem. So
Yes.
peace and love to everyone in the chat. I see brother Shakra King Black is in the building. Ashar Malik is in the building. Sister Crystal Denise is in the building. RBG, Red, Black, and Green, he's in the building. Coke Crow is in the building. Peace and blessings to all of you. Peace and blessings to all of you, Black African power. All right, so Doc, I want to start this off. I
Mhm.
usually throw it to T, but I really want to start this off with a clear definition of
Uh-huh.
Pan Africanist, because in this chapter, I mean, you've been arguing throughout the book that Booker T. Washington should be mentioned, amongst the Pan Africanists that we hold in high regard. But in this particular chapter, you really hone in on his relationships and his work with African nationalists and Pan-Africanists. So before we even start, because it may be someone who's like Pan-Africanist, what are they talking about? Could you give us a definition on what is a Pan-Africanist? What is an African nationalist?
Well, first, so thank you. One, thank you for having me. And you're right. Omawali Africa is right. You're becoming the Oprah of our community and our time. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Brother T, also for having me. And thank you, Dr. Ma, for even undertaking doing this, right? Because this book is not without not reasonable challenge, but there's people who challenge, like, you're doing that. Right. So first, so thank you both. Pan-Africanism. So I start, actually, the first time I give a definition of first time I give a definition of Pan-Africanism is in chapter 2. And I basically use the bare bones definition that is involved in the first Pan-African conference. And it emerges as just the unity of African people for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation. That's bare bones, right? Bare bones definition. Us coming together to address exploitation and oppression of our people, wherever we are, okay? And so I'm drawing from the historical definition. But then, as you can see in that same chapter, I go into the form of Pan-Africanism that Garvey and Du Bois will express. And at the core of all of those is the unity of African and Black people for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation, essentially addressing our condition. Pan-Africanism, and then I go on to tell you that there will be other people who are Pan-Africanists who will add other layers onto the concept of Pan-Africanism. Like, for example, Nkrumah, right? You will say the unity of African people are essentially for the purpose of Pan-Africanism is the unification of African people under scientific socialism. That's his expression of Pan-Africanism. So what I do in terms of giving an understanding of Pan-Africanism is get to the core and bare bones definition. And that is unity for the purpose of eradicating oppression or exploitation of African people, but in a measurable way. In other words, it's an activity. Pan-Africanism is an action, it's a verb. A Pan-Africanist would be the individual who engages in the action, right? But across the board, the concept should be that what we're doing is addressing our condition of exploitation and oppression, right? This is why right now we have a lot of conversations going on, particularly because of ADOS and other movements that criticize Pan-Africanism and say that Pan-Africanism hasn't done anything for us. Well, if it hasn't done anything for us, that means it's not Pan-Africanist.
Hold up, Doc. You got to say that again. If it hasn't done, go ahead.
If us coming together did not produce anything for us, then it is not Pan-Africanist, because Pan-Africanism produces something for us. It actually is to address our very real condition under oppression and as people who are exploited worldwide.
That's right.
So when people are saying, well, Pan-Africanism hasn't done anything for us, and my answer is that, well, then that is not Pan-Africanism, right? I teach an international class with a Black tech company, and I teach people all over the world. At this point, we're thousands upon thousands of people, and we started at the beginning of the pandemic. And I teach a Pan-African history and organizing course, which is an ideological training course. for that particular organization that leverages technology to deal with social issues like racism and xenophobia. That being said, one of the things that I work aggressively on is getting them to understand that, you know, Pan-Africanism is about action, and that what we're committed to do, and I bring this from my political background, what we're committed to do is loving our people through action, right? So not just in ringing their declaration or in name only, but in action. And I often give them the example, like, hey, say I have a house party. And if I have a house party or an event and we are all representing various ethnicities in the African family tree, is that Pan-Africanist? No, it's not Pan-Africanist. It's only Pan-Africanist if we come together with the precise purpose of dealing with and coming up with strategies and tactics and actions that address our specific condition.
No,
right?
facts, Doc. And thank you for that. And that's why I titled this show, Is Pan-Africanism Really Did? I know we're going to be focusing on Booker T. Washington, but that's why I titled the discussion, you know, is it really did? I mean, like, because that's what a lot of people say. I get, you know, when I talk about, it was a few days ago, I had a discussion called, entitled, you know, how do you identify and why, right? And so I said, I identify as an African in American, African in America. And I said, and my ideology is Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism. That's my ideology. So people in the comment section, like, why is she talking about Pan-Africanism? Pan-Africanism is dead. ADOS all the way. FBA all the way. And they, you know, so all of that stuff. And so I think though, to be honest with you, Dr. Wright, a lot of those things, a lot of the things that they're saying is dead, because they're not aware of the history of Pan-Africanism, which is what you unpack in this chapter. You talk about the conferences, the congresses. You talk about the African nationalists and what they accomplished, and the Pan-Africanists and what they accomplished. Some of these people, Dr. Wright, that you mentioned in this chapter, I have to be honest, I never heard of them before. You know, I was reading the T. I was looking at the. I said, who is this person from South Africa? You know, who is this person that she mentioned from, I think it was Nigeria or Ghana? I'm like, who is this person? You know? And so I really, to be honest with you, Dr. Wright, I really thank you for that overview that you gave of each person that Booker T. Washington corresponded with. And so, Brother T, go ahead and kick off. I know you're going to read the first page. Kick it off, Brother T, for us.
Oh, I agree with Dr. Wright and also you, Dr. Ma'at. Majority of this information I've never seen, and I'm glad that we introducing this, number one, because guess what? As we're learning it, we're sharing with our audience as well. And I know that a namesake, what the same surname is, Dubé, I think how you pronounce it, the South African who started the first African school of his life on the continent. I had no idea, and he said in the comments. Same last name as myself. It's Dubé, brother. It's Dubé. So just giving this information is helping us to learn things and also connect to those also in the chat. What I wanted to focus on is what Dr. Tyrene Wright was stating prior. It was that if it's not working for the African, it's not Pan-Africanist. So I'll remember on page 71 is when Booker T. Washington made the point to Hunt, who wanted to have students come to I believe to the Sudan to do work, and he stated because of his what he learned, Booker T. Washington learned about colonialism that was happening in that part. He didn't want to send students, if I believe, he didn't want to send students because he didn't want them students to be part of the colonialism. So I read here on page 71, it says that Booker T. Washington had laid out his plans to colonize American blacks on the cotton plantation in the Sudan. And Washington wrote Hunt back in January of 1904. And while he was kind, he was very pointed regarding the matter of Negro colonization. Before closing his brief letter to Hunt, he made it clear, as I think I have said to you, I am not in favor of wholesale colonization of the Negro people in Africa or anywhere else. And I think that lays point to what you were stating. If it's not for the African, it's not Pan-African. So he understood even back then. This is not if you're what you're trying to do with the students in Africa is not helping us, then don't include it in the plan. So I think that goes to the point what Dr. Wright was stating.
And peace to brother Sincere Love to God. Family, you got to get his album. It's on Tidal. Oh my goodness, he has a song dedicated to Doc. It's called Francis Cress Wilson.
Okay.
Beautiful song, powerful song. So salute to you, Sincere Love to God. He said it has to be a two-way street, and it hasn't. So she is right. It has not been Pan-Africanist because it hasn't been reciprocal and therefore non-productive. And so thank you, brother, for chiming in. But brother T, I wanted to start with the quote. And I know that you mentioned page 71, but I want to start at the very beginning with the quote that Dr. Wright put at the beginning. I felt like it was very powerful. And I highlighted two sentences, actually the last sentence on the first paragraph. But this was a statement she made from Booker T. Washington, a statement that Booker T. Washington actually wrote, I guess in one of his private papers. He said, "My interest in the race to which I belong and in the advancement of the cause of humanity, regardless of race, is my excuse for discussing a subject which I have not hitherto called attention to in public print. The oppression of the colored race," and this is what I highlighted, "the oppression of the colored race in any one part of the world means sooner or later the oppression of the same race elsewhere." When I read that, I thought about Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, something along those lines, right?
Yes.
So essentially, Booker T is saying, look, if you got colored people oppressed in one area of the world, sooner or later it's going to happen in other parts of the world, right?
Right.
So we have to work to eradicate that. And so she goes on to say, and this is Booker T, "No one who has followed conditions as they have been developed in what is called the Congo Free State in Africa can fail to reach the conclusion that there is something wrong, a wrong so widespread that civilized nations cannot escape their duty nor evade their responsibility." So she began that quote. And Doc, I know why you did it, because then you move into all of the different endeavors, right? Or his efforts to eradicate oppression. And you started, well, before you started with that, you started with you started with the Atlanta Compromise. So you started with the Atlanta Compromise, and then you moved into the different, endeavors that he was a part of to eradicate oppression in Africa. But let's move to page 60, Doc, where you talked about that one line that was extremely controversial, right? When he was giving his speech. And you said here, I'm looking for it right now. You talked about one line in the speech. Okay, so he says the speech that became known as the Atlanta Compromise established Booker T. Washington as a preeminent African-American leader in the U.S. And it says those who objected to the accommodation of racist social policy saw the speech as a compromise of the worst kind, right? Because based on that speech, we hear he was a sellout. He's accommodationist. He's rolling with the white folks. He's handing us over the white. So you said critics considered it a wholesale endorsement of segregation, a call to forfeit political and civil rights, right? And then you move on to discuss the specific line where Booker T. Washington addresses the audience, and he says, "In all things purely social, we can be as separate as five fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress." Now, Professor James Small told me on this show, on this platform, that he said a lot of white immigrants or like European immigrants were coming into the country at that particular time. And he said, Booker T was like, wait a minute, you all are looking out for them. But, the Black American, we've been here the whole time. So look, we can be, purely, separate socially. But, we still can, be yet as one hand in all things essential to mutual progress. So is that the context in which he made this statement, Doc?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That it is propagandizing against European immigration. And If you understand, you know how we right now, there are certain things going on and we may just jump into the conversation, right? Because we all know what's going on, right? What's going on? It's still the pandemic. It's still, just various things going on. And so he didn't feel a need to say, hey, there's some Europeans coming from Europe who are, and they're competing for jobs. Everyone knew what was going on at that time, right? 1895, because there's an influx, Ellis Island, all of that. I actually used to work on European immigration records and archives. And that being said, he is propagandizing against that. However, I'll leave it there. So yes, that's precisely what it is.
Okay. Okay. And from that speech, you said a lot of people, that's when people started attacking him. Oh, he's accepting, segregation. Oh, he's a part of the social political. So they started, basically attacking him for that. And then you move on to start talking about, and I thought this was very powerful. I know my mother is in the chat. So Mama, I want you to hear this. In his article, Christianizing Africa.
Right.
Oh, I thought that was so powerful because it shows that even back then, our ancestors recognized how Christianity was used as a tool to colonize Africa.
Yes.
And so, he and Booker T. Washington wrote an article. I have to pull this article and read the entire article, Doc. But you mentioned this article that was published in December of 1896.
Mhm.
And you talked about how, Booker T. Washington said that, they would send the missionaries over. They would send the missionaries over, send the church over, but they would use religion, and I quote, you said, to mask imperial objectives.
Yes.
And so you said that, and this is something that we've seen throughout Africa. Here come the missionaries, here comes the church, here comes the Bible. And then before you know it, as Jomo Kenyatta said, he said, man, before they came here, we had the land and they taught us about Jesus, told us get on our knees and pray. And then when we open our eyes, they had the land, and then we had the Bible.
Right.
So they came, gave us the Bible, took the land, and then next, we walking around with the Bible while they're colonizing, our land. So Doc, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, I mean, Washington, like of all the things he could have chose to talk about, of course, he's speaking about something that is impacting the African world, right? If you notice too, though, I say where he's at when he writes the first of several articles, he's in Tuskegee, and he decides to write this article about what's happening in the Congo, in a local paper. So he's propagandizing against the atrocities going on in the Congo and in Africa from his base in Tuskegee. And he is, by this point, I think it's a little further, but, it's a little further in. He educates himself not only on Africa, but African ethnicity, the dynamics of imperialism, how it's moving across the continent. And so he knows that missionary work is right there in the middle, under the guises, Christianizing African people, but really with the objective of imperial objectives to take land, essentially. And so this is also why I often say, and I don't think I need to say it, but this is why I often say, he was not extremely religious, because it doesn't mean you're not spiritual. It doesn't mean you don't have a connection with God. It just means that organized Western religion, right? Because we know Christianity begins in Africa and many religions begin in Africa. But once it is the form that is used to colonize us and enslave us, you can see that he has a rejection of it, right? He says in one boat, they go with the rifle and with the Bible, and the other with the gun, right? And so in other words, using violence to dominate people. And so he's very acutely aware of this. He rejects it. Of all things he could have written about, he wrote about Christianizing Africa. And what does that have to do with? It really is about colonizing Africa, right? More than anything else.
Yeah, it was never about. It was never about spreading the gospel or spreading the word.
No.
It wasn't that. And I saw that firsthand, Doc, when I went over to Elmina,
Mhm.
and how literally, Brother T, you had a church that was right across from the male and female dungeons. I mean, how sick is that? Like
Yes.
literally in Elmina, you had the male dungeon, the female dungeon, and a Portuguese church is sitting in the middle of Elmina. I also saw it when I went to Cape Coast, and they had a church on top
Yes.
of the dungeons, Brother T, on
Yes.
top of the male dungeons in Cape Coast. So it
Yes.
wasn't about, these people in one breath, they talking about God and Jesus, but in the next breath, they're treating human beings like animals, like cattle, like less than human, And so
Yes.
it was never about when they introduced us to Christianity, it was never about trying to spread the word. It was about control. It was about power. It's
Of
about
course.
colonization and
Right.
imperialism. Brother T, you wanted to chime
I
in?
wanted to bring up a term because when I read this part of the book, I thought about this term I heard years ago called rice Christians. Rice Christians was an expression, is a term used to describe someone who was formally converted to Christianity
Mhm.
for material benefits rather than religious reasons.
Mhm.
So it says that they converted because they needed medical supplies, they needed food, they needed shelter, and was used as a decoy, as Dr. Tyrene Wright placed in this part of the book, is that Booker T was correct. It was because they was gaining grounding and also converting the people for that reason. So it wasn't just to say, I'm giving you something that makes you feel good in your salvation. I'm doing this to take over your land and also use you as human resources.
Mm-hmm. And then she moves the conversation into Booker T back to Africa. Remember how everybody was saying we need to go back to Africa, and Booker T.
Mm-hmm.
Washington was like, "Wait a minute, I have to weigh the pros and cons of this,
That's right.
right?" And what he noticed is that he said, "Well, wait a minute, I'm not going to encourage my people who are already under European domination here, right? I'm not going to take them and send them someplace else to be under European domination."
That's right.
Right.
And so he talks to that. So could you speak to that, Dr. Wright?
Yes, and thank you for highlighting that because um if you notice, I include his commentary about his relationship with none other than Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, right?
Yes.
And he begins that particular article where he starts to talk about, of course, because of his relationship and his great respect for Bishop McNeil Turner, that he had to give the option of returning back to the continent of Africa serious thought and consideration. He couldn't dismiss it, right? So that also too, I think, is very important because if Washington was who one thinks he is, a very American Negro who does not understand his African origins or our African origins, then why does he even consider Africa, right? He's saying, I have to consider it because this is important. Our goal is to be free of oppression, right? So he, if I may read just a little bit, he
Oh, please
said,
do.
yeah, he's let's see, his commentary on Africa was not limited to the disturbance of the continent and its people by European imperialists. The social, political, and economic conditions in the U.S. at the time forced Washington to explore a return to Africa by the African American population. In his published letter to the editor of the Washington Colored American, he examined the pros and cons of the Back to Africa movement prior to Marcus Garvey. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, Alexander Crummell, and Edward Blyden either promoted or returned to Africa. And although a return to Africa was not a personal consideration for Washington, he re-examined it for the masses of African people within the U.S. In 1899, while in London, he wrote to the editor of the Washington Colored American and laid out why a return to Africa was simply not plausible if the desire was to improve the condition of African people. Hence, if the desire, not I'm rejecting it just on the basis of rejecting Africa or anything like that. If the desire is to improve the condition of African people, of Black people, he began by recalling his careful consideration of a mass return to Africa and how he felt about the promoters of the movement. So this is him speaking. I have always had the highest respect for those of our race who, in trying to find a solution for our Southern problem, and he should have said our problem at large, not just the Southern problem, right?
Right.
Advised a return of the race in large measure to Africa. He's saying, I've always had the highest respect for them, right? He explained that due to his respect for people like Bishop Turner and others, and the conditions in the U.S., he had to consider a return and therefore made a careful, unbiased study of the question, right? And ultimately, I mean, you can go on and read the rest, but he ultimately says everywhere, there's almost nowhere the European has not gobbled up. They're all over the continent. It has been infected by them, and those small territories that have not been captured by them are in this unusual category called under their sphere of influence. In other words, it's a soft way of saying that they will engage in force, in my opinion. That's my opinion about what it means. That's my interpretation. Because you're not to the Liberian crisis yet and the African exclusion measure, but there are unclaimed territories, even Liberia in a sense, and they are actively engaging in trying to take land with force. Okay, so that's where my interpretation comes from, even though it's not. I'm aware of that when I'm writing this.
So, no. Thank you.
So that's why. But he's saying there's almost nowhere we can go on the continent of Africa where we would not be under their sphere of influence. And so I guess we better take our chances here.
So, okay. All right. And I know Okunini Kambon would say something different. That brother, you need to get out of America. You know, he called it America. He left his family, his parents, they actually just repatriated. They had a spot down in the South. I don't want to say exactly where, but they had a spot in the South. And I was told that they recently joined him in Ghana.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So they just left, and he's like, we gotta get out of America. But Booker T is saying, okay, I mean, if you go over there, just understand that, they're still there. And I saw that firsthand when I went to Cameroon. They're over there speaking French. And I remember being there thinking about Dr. John Henry Clark. Dr. John Henry Clark said, if you show me your religion and your language, I'll show you your conqueror. So I'm over there looking at them. They're speaking French. So throughout, and I see French statues erected. The French control their gas stations there. I mean, it's bananas. So
absolutely.
I mean, we do see it still, still today. You have the French still there. You have the, of course, Britain, of course, England, Britain, they're there. Now China, Brother T, and you were just talking about that before we went live. Now China's gobbling up, Africa and even the Caribbean and places like that. And so, we still witness, what we're witnessing is neocolonization today, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so then you move the conversation into the Togo Cotton Expedition. And this is when you talk about how Booker T. Washington was evolving as a Pan-Africanist, right? You were saying that you see that he was undergoing some sort of transformation, right? Because during the Togo Cotton Expedition, there was some German colonial administrators, right, who reached out to him and said, "Hey, could you send some of your students over here to implement the Tuskegee methods to grow cotton?" And so you're right about because for me, a Pan-Africanist, I will be questioning Dr. Wright. And you say this in the chapter. You said, well, he did do some things that were contradictory, right? In terms of Pan-Africanism. Because how can you say you're a Pan-Africanist, but you're sending your students to Africa or to a country in Africa, to Togo, to implement your methods to grow cotton for the Germans who are colonizing Togo, right? That's not Pan-Africanism. And so you talked about, that how he did some contradictory things, but then you also said that it was an opportunity for him to get feet on the ground in Africa to see what was going on. And so could you all unpack, I don't know, Brother T, if you want to unpack the Togo expedition or... Oh, he said, go ahead, Dr. Wright.
Okay, so just so you all know, this was the most challenging chapter in the book to write. And let me just give you an overview of, like, just really quick, of how you should view just Washington's story. There's a time where I wouldn't say he's exactly a Pan-Africanist, right? His consciousness develops much like many people's consciousness develop here and now. Unfortunately, right? And I'm open to that, because I definitely have had a different path in terms of my life. A lot of the things that I know now, I learned at home, okay, in my formative years. I didn't learn I was an African person when I got to school. I learned that at home. I knew I was African at 6, but that's besides the point. Like, concretely knew I was African, right? So, that being said, most of our encounter with who we are and understanding our relationship to other African people doesn't come until much, much later, okay, in life. What Washington's trajectory is just this. He's always interested because of his mother. He always had a desire. He understands that. He understood there is an Africa. Those are African people that we came through a journey. He has a desire to engage. I'm sure you saw that already. He always had a desire to engage in Africa in some significant way, he says, right? But he hasn't gone through an education really in terms of what your posture should be. Okay. Even right now, we have an issue, many of us, and I lived in Senegal. I don't want to blow people up, but there's a lot of us there, and we're playing white, Black people in Africa. That's why some of us go and love it and don't want to come back. Not because we love Africa or African people, because we love, being in a space that we're not in here and playing white to the indigenous African person. I'm just going to keep it real. So, and as we get to the Liberian crisis, you'll see how that works, and you'll see whose side Washington is on in respect to the Liberian crisis. Because, listen, I give criticism where criticism is due. I don't have any problem with that, because that's my job as the historian, the interpreter of the history, right? So I'm laying out the facts, but I'm definitely not afraid to give you interpretation, meaning that where he's wrong, where he's right, and where we are wrong, collectively, we're wrong, and when we right, we right. What happens in the context of the Liberian crisis is you see us, have this desire to leave America because of the oppression, and then go to Liberia and set up a system that discriminates against the indigenous African person that's never been displaced. Okay? And why? On what basis? Except for that we are coming from the United States. And so the whole Americo-Liberian dilemma and issue. And it goes on for decades. We are actually the seeds that are sown there in many years of war to come in Liberia, right? So we got to own that too, ethnically, right? Like our ethnic group is responsible for the dissension that gave way to many, many decades of war in Liberia. So so my attitude with engaging African people is like, you got to have your mind right. You understand? You need to have your mind right. Don't go in Africa playing white. Don't go into Africa playing like you're an Israeli going into Palestine. I mean, that's not what we do. Do you get what I'm saying? You're not displacing anybody. You don't have a right to displace anybody. I don't care if we were here yesterday, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. Right. So, so we have to be very clear on that. And so what Washington, just to kind of take it back, this is a very interesting case because one, Washington is uninformed. This is a transformative moment for him, the Togo expedition. This chapter right here was challenging to write because I'm trying to give you information about all the impulses he had, right? How he engages in this, how he is transformed. First, he's being transformed by the people he's communicating with on the African continent. They're giving him direct information about their condition. Two, he's being transformed by people who have been exposed to Africa, right? Who are already engaging Africa, but are not African nationalists on the continent. Like who? Henry McNeill Turner. He's even telling you, I had to consider back to Africa because I respect the people who are at the helm of the Back to Africa movement, right? So that's not the American Negro posture. The American Negro posture is like, we here, we're gonna stay here, we never leaving, and we love our white folks. Okay. And I mean, that's the American Negro profile, right? We want to be them, but just brown, so that's not his posture. He's saying I have to consider that. That's transformative for him to say that he has to consider something that is going to change our condition or potentially change our condition. He does not have an aversion towards Africa, so he has to consider it. So once again, that's a transformative moment. But then the Togo, he comes to understand, you see in the beginning, he tells you he's contacted. Who is he contacted by? I give you all the specifics, right? Because this is coming from the personal paper. So I'm not, this is drawing right from the direct correspondence. I see the letters sent to him by the German colonial administrator who writes to him. Now, I also put it in context so you understand why he would be open to this, because it goes back to the story of the Negro, as he tells you about his thoughts about Africa, that he always wanted to go to Africa, that he always wanted to be involved in Africa in some significant way. And he's like anybody. For most people, their first trip is a challenge. Their first engagement is a challenge, right? You don't know people, you don't know how and so he gets this offer. The sheer offer, and I kind of reject other people who dare to like venture into this information and not really adequately go to the papers to see. I mean, you should never even touch this if you're not going to see the direct correspondence between the students the graduates who end up there, and they do write back and forth, and I give you some blip of what they're saying to him about what's happening in Togo and what the German colonial administrators are saying to him. So basically, it's an invitation for graduates to bring cotton production methods to the Togo. And that's all it is, right? He should have said, I'm not going to do anything with any colonial force, right? Because he's already written Christianizing Africa. He has some understanding, right? However, he doesn't have depth in terms of understanding what's going on the ground, in particular in the Togo, right? And you have to understand also, I don't mention this, but you have to understand also that the Germans are the least of the colonial forces on the ground in Africa, meaning they engage in Togo, but they also engage in Namibia, and that's it. Part of what's going on in Africa is that those other further Western European nations don't want Germany there. And reasonably so. I'm not saying they're any more ethical. They're totally unethical. If you know what they did in Namibia, they committed genocide, okay, and engaged in biological warfare. So, but he does not know anything about what's happening there. And I say that. I tell you what's happening there, right? Because as a researcher, I need to tell you. He didn't know this. This was actually what was going on the ground, right? There had been clashes on the ground between the indigenous Togolese groups and the Germans. He knows nothing of this because certainly nobody's reporting this. when his students get there, they are informing him of all of this, right? What's happening, what the conditions are actually like, and what the Germans are up to. So this is an educational process for him. Okay. Indeed, he's overzealous. He is, my personal opinion, and I share it in there, he's living vicariously through his students. He knows he's not going to Africa. He's going to live through them. They're going to go to Africa. Okay. But the way in which they go to Africa matters. It matters. It mattered. Okay. And it is catastrophic. The students do share their relationship to the German colonial forces on the ground, and they're critiquing, they're criticizing. For anybody who's interested in this, you should go to, I give you direct, I tell you where to go in the papers to read the letters from the students, right? And I actually quote some of the students on page 65, right? John Robinson, Shepard, Lincoln Harris, and Alan Lynn Burke were the first Tuskegee graduates to arrive in Togo and initiate the cotton growing project. And that's really all it was that they were up to. They were sharing Southern and Tuskegee specifically cotton growing methods, because of course Tuskegeans have a school of agriculture. They're agriculturalists. This is one of the trades they're involved in. That being said, those 9 students, graduates, are not there to colonize the Togo. I've heard that before. I saw somebody write that. That's laughable. That's like 9 of us going to anywhere on Africa and like, we're here to colonize. First of all, there's a European colonial regime there already. 2, that wouldn't have even been, just like it's not on the minds of most African people to do anything like colonize another group of people. Certainly wouldn't have been on the minds of those 9 graduates. Okay. They are very young. Just think of yourself when you graduate from college. Are you thinking about like, I'm going to cross an ocean and go colonize an African nation? First of all, generally African people in all of history don't cross oceans to colonize anybody.
Not at all.
Check it. Right. Check that. I mean, I'm just saying, check the historical record.
Right.
He crosses the ocean, but he doesn't colonize anything out here. And he comes over here, centuries before Europeans do. So that's not what we do. First of all, I think it's sort of like asinine for people to imply that Tuskegee, the institution, and 9 students who were obviously unbelievably vulnerable, and almost half, if not most, died, that they were up to colonizing a portion of Africa. that's not it.
No.
That's not it. So what ends up happening is just that they die. Some of them die. Most of them die ultimately. And it is catastrophic for Washington, for Tuskegee. It's a sad thing. And, reference to this case as some aspect of Pan-Africanism generally shows people's ignorance about the subject matter, because this is the least of Washington's activity in relationship to Africa. Okay. This is the least, right? It's not more than 5 years in terms of this engagement, but it educates him in terms of understanding that there is no relationship you can have with imperialist forces in Africa that could be good for us.
Bingo.
No relationship you can have with them. Not at all. And he understands it. So you can look at chapter 4 is that period of transformation. And when he comes out of that period of transformation, there's a number of things, Togo being one of those things that force a transformation. This always reminds me of what Garvey says: when all else fails to organize the people, conditions will. Well, this situation will be a condition that's forced to organize his thinking and transform how he relates and understands the conditions and the challenges that African people have on the continent and abroad. And it's a painful thing. Think about any transformation that we undergo. Usually it's painful. if it's worthwhile. Usually painful.
Mine was
But
definitely painful.
right. But what comes out on the other side is something beneficial. So my position is that he is not exactly, he's getting a very painful crash course in this chapter, right? I give you all the experiences that influence him. And when he comes out on the other side of all of these experiences and interactions and everything, he is something very different. He is, in fact, a Pan-Africanist. Now, why do I say that? Well, one of the first things he gets involved in is the Liberian crisis, and he's being solicited. But he understands the posture because he understands we know that because of the fact that he understands the very complex nature in which we are, in fact, existing in Liberia, right? And I don't want to jump too far ahead because you got to have something to look forward to.
Yeah.
But you'll see whether or not, what's his posture in terms of Liberia, because someone else who also is how would you say, would like to be a critic of this book gets into like, oh, well, Liberia was just, him having the Americo-Liberian position, which is, like anti-African. And that's not true. You have to read it to understand his position in Liberia. And he's not aligned with the Americo-Liberian population per se. He's aligned with the Liberian population.
With the indigenous population. Brother T, because I had to hop off in about 10 minutes. Brother T,
sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're good. Brother T, go into the Congo Free State. Okay. Take us into the Congo Free State.
Well, my question, I think this will help out a lot, and I don't let Dr. Tyrene finish this off, is that in this chapter we talked about Booker T and his understanding exactly what was happening in Africa, and his he was slowly thinking deeply about sending his students to parts of the continent if colonization was going to be part. Can you, Dr. Tyrene, can you please go into his mindset if any more was written into the letters about Leopold? Because I didn't know he had so much influence. A lot of people who are criticizing Booker T for not touching the continent, we got to understand he had boots on the ground here, and his influence alone had Leopold afraid. So, Dr. Tyrene, can you please discuss that?
Yes. So, and this is interesting too, because there's somebody who, a novice, is sort of like someone who desires, I guess, to engage this topic, talked about Robert Parks. So Booker T. Washington hired this guy by the name of Robert Parks. He was a white male sociologist from the University of Chicago. And Robert Parks, he hires him to do research for him. He hires him even as a ghostwriter. Okay. And someone said he was, Robert Parks was, they got the person confused with Harlan. And I'm like, no, Robert Parks was a subordinate, really, of Booker T. Washington. Washington hired him to do research as a sociologist. He would scour situations, this, that, and other. Anyway, Booker T. Washington was aware of the Congo as a result of his own understanding of what was happening in terms of the continent at the time. That being said, he begins to write a number of letters and articles propagandizing against the atrocities in the Congo Free State. Not only does he do that, he also becomes the vice president of what is now known as Friends of the Congo. Okay. Mr. Carney, who is down there in, I think, the DC area now, he leads that organization, and he's very aware of Washington's historic role in that organization. Washington, while he is in the officer position in that organization, he lobbies the very White House Theodore Roosevelt leads, even though he is counsel to Theodore Roosevelt, but he challenges him on the U.S. position on the Congo, because you see, I open up that part saying that the United States is the first Western nation to actually acknowledge the sole ownership of the Congo by King Leopold, which I think is ridiculous. A territory he had never set foot in. He dared to say he owned it. Okay. So there's a number of letters that are fired off, not the letters, articles that are fired off through various newspapers, propagandizing against the atrocities in the Congo, to the degree that he gets the attention of King Leopold and one of his aides. And then because of the impact of this, Washington is already internationally known, and they're worried about him. So his aides say, one of King Leopold's aides say, could you please come to Belgium? And the king would love to show you that that's not what's going on in the Congo. Of course, Washington didn't go. I mean, he probably wouldn't have made it back. Why?
That's what I was thinking. That, right. I thought about Toussaint. Remember when Toussaint went over and tried to negotiate with the French, and they ended up throwing him in jail, and then I think either they killed him or they poisoned him or they starved him to death, something like that happened. But that's what I thought about. Like, why would he go over there to?
So
he wouldn't have made it back.
You're not doing whatever in the Congo. On top of that, like
he wouldn't have made it back. They would have killed him.
Right, of course. So so he doesn't accept the offer, but they know. And then Robert Parks questions him, because Robert Parks, in fact, is the editor of many of these articles that he's writing. There's a sort of a respite in between, and Robert Parks asks him, like, what's happening with the Congo, and he's like, no, I have continuous interest, basically. And he begins to write another series of letters in the press, not even letters, but articles on the Congo. And he thinks that, of course, that it needs to be challenged. So this is a time where he does something that goes unnoticed. He is involved in the Friends of the Congo, and he challenges the U.S. in their support for the Congo and the acknowledgement of this man being the sole owner of the Congo and the atrocities he's committing. So, but nobody sees that, right? He doesn't make it public. Most of what he's doing, nobody really knows about. And that's why he's able to do that. That's another thing, too. He's up to all of this because that is truly who he is. And he can do it in the shadows because nobody suspects that he's up to this stuff. Nobody suspects that at all, okay? Nobody suspects that he is communicating with all of these various people on the African continent, but he is, okay? And colonial forces and administrators on the ground, you should have probably seen in some of the various people he's communicating with. Some of the people on their end, like in South Africa, they don't want contact between African people in America and their indigenous groups there, because they feel like we will radicalize them. So Washington is quietly communicating with many different people, but yes, he uses his voice and his power. He is trying to leverage some power and influence what is happening in the Congo. Okay.
Absolutely. And then you end this section with the Sudan. You talk about how in the winter of 1903, that Lee Hunt, an American Midwest educator and businessman, he reached out to Booker T. Washington to request 3 assistants to hire, to work with him on a cotton growing project that he established in the Sudan and East Africa. And it said, but Hunt supported the globalization of the New South. So in his letter, he laid out his plans to colonize. And I think, Brother T, you talked about this earlier, to colonize American Blacks. And Brother T, you read it earlier, so I won't reread it. But you said he made his position clear that I'm not sending my graduates or my students out anywhere to assist with the colonization of African people, and so you already read that, T, so I won't expound on that. So Dr. Wright, could you take us into the African Nationalist affiliates? And like I said, these were people I've never heard of. Some of these names, I've never heard of, but you spend an entire section, like right before the conclusion, there's an entire section entitled African Nationalist Affiliates, and you give us an overview of each of these people. So if we could move there, that would be
okay. So so I give you some pictures. So I'll just run from the pictures, but like there's Duzé Muhammad Ali. He was Egyptian born. and the editor of the African Times and Orient Review. And this is a well-known paper that existed during that time that was really very much indicative of chronicling our condition everywhere we are. But he goes to Duse Muhammad Ali is not only in touch with Booker T. Washington, but he is also in touch with Marcus Garvey, and he goes from Egypt to Nigeria, and he's distributing also the Negro World, Garvey's paper. Then you have Chilembwe, who is in Malawi. He actually strikes one of the first blows on, you know how here they say Nat Turner struck the first blow of the Civil War, really. He signaled, and John Brown did as well, that this would end violently. Well, that's how John Chilembwe was, and he was a follower of Booker T. Washington, at least in terms of his work. And then John Tengo Jabavu and Don Tengo Jabavu, both of South Africa. He actually is, I believe Jabavu is the one who actually does the My Tuskegee pilgrimage, and then comes back to South Africa and is like, wow, Booker T. Washington was under a lot of stress and duress, but he's also an early member of the ANC. And then you have Pixley Ka Isakasimi of South Africa, early member of the ANC as well, founding member of the ANC. And then you had Casely Hayford, who actually made it to the International Conference on the Negro held at Tuskegee in 1912. And he's from previously Gold Coast, present-day Ghana. And he was also a Pan-Africanist of sorts. And then you have Dube, of course, of South Africa. All of the people from South Africa had, in some way or another, either started a school or were early members of the ANC, the African National Congress in South Africa. And they are communicating directly with Booker T. Washington. Some see, similarities, and they are giving him. So one way to look at this is that we've always had this dialectical relationship going on around our condition, from the African continent to the Caribbean to Central and South America to back to the United States. We are constantly communicating. And this dialectical relationship is also another aspect of transforming Washington's condition, because there was no way to pick up a phone and say, hey, how you doing over there? How those folks treating you? That wasn't happening. They had to write to each other. And what they wrote was obviously going to be of the utmost importance, because that is the main way of communication. You're not going to watch TV and see what's going on in South Africa or anything. So the details that are shared are transformative. As much as Washington is sharing various, sharing information, he is actually getting more from them than you understand. So it's wrong. And I say that in part of the chapter, I'm not sure where, that it would be wrong to think that they are just extracting from him. He is also extracting very important information on the condition of African people on the ground, and able to sort of locate the relationship between our condition and their condition. And he comes to say, I realize that the condition on the ground in Africa is quite complex. Okay, so this whole chapter is all about his transformation. But one more thing before I go, I actually or before we all go, there's one point where I get into Zimmerman. Right?
You read it, Dr. Wright. I was right there. I was getting ready to say that you lead into the conclusion. You give us a summary of what you discuss, and then you end with Andrew Zimmerman discussing different types of Pan-Africanism.
Right.
So could you break that down, Doc?
Yeah. So let's be very clear. Andrew Zimmerman is a white male, to my knowledge. He is not an African person. And I hear a lot of people who want to know about Tuskegee in Africa or Washington in Africa. They bring up his name because he has had a monopoly also on this conversation up until this book. And so or up until my research. So people tend to reference his work, and wrongfully so. That tells me that you're not doing any more work on the subject matter than reading this white man's book. Okay. But his book is not to be upheld, because his book is about and only about the Togo and about the German expedition and the German feats and strides made by way of using Black people to go into an African community and implement cotton production. Okay. Zimmerman talks about, he tries to say that this was sort of a Pan-Africanist thing. And that's partially probably where some of the people who are novices at this subject matter are getting that from. The Togo expedition was not Pan-Africanist at all. The strides made in cotton production would all be to the credit of the German colonial regime, and not at all to the credit of Tuskegeans or to the Togolese people or anything. It was just purebred standard colonization and utilizing a people to extract what they wanted from the environment. The only difference is that's notable is that the experts that you used in agriculture happen to come from a Black institution. Okay. But it is not anything to celebrate. It's not an example of Pan-Africanism. And you know how what did it do for African people?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Mm-hmm. That goes back to the question you asked me in the beginning, a definition of Pan-Africanism. At the end of the Liberian crisis, at the end of the African exclusion measure, you will know very clearly how African people benefit, the tangibles that African people got. In this case, the Togo, there are no tangibles for us. There was never meant to be there any tangibles for us. And it wasn't meant to serve in our interests at all. So there you go. It wasn't Pan-Africanism, and it wasn't Pan-Africanist. And I think it's very interesting that Zimmerman dared to even enter that conversation around Pan-Africanism and say that the coalescing of Africans on the continent with Africans in or in the United States somehow makes it Pan-Africanist in nature. So this lets me know that anybody who thinks that doesn't know what Pan-Africanism means, does not know the details of the case, is too lazy to open up one of the volumes of the Tuskegee Booker T. Washington's personal papers so you can see what the students, the graduates who are on the ground in Togo are saying, because they're saying basically this is a hot mess. We're going to try to help the indigenous people as much as possible. But this ridiculous notion that they were in some control type of, they were in control of anything is stupid. Like, are you in control of anything today? Oh, no. So, like, what makes you think a former student, a graduate, would go over to Togo and have any measure of control in that big dynamic? However, what they did do was try to connect with the indigenous Togolese people in light of the Germans' desire to create an oppressive culture in that context of that expedition. So it's not Pan-Africanist, and you can just neatly apply the definition and eliminate it as even a possibility, right, of it being an example of Pan-Africanism. If I could go forward today and never hear about Zimmerman, I would be very happy, because I think we should be embarrassed when we even bring him up. Okay. If we want to know the details, we can find the details on our own. I didn't create this. And, there's people who are finally getting to this. Someone told me that a young student actually wrote a whole thesis on how Tuskegee colonized the Togo. What a waste of time. Like, are you serious? And why do I say that? Because all you need to do is go to the personal papers and find out every student's name. Like, I gave you some of the students' name. You can find everything they've written from Togo to Tuskegee and Washington. Like, you can find out the intimate details. So to me, it's just for a lack of, like, if you can't call yourself a researcher if you actually don't do that and it's there. How do you not do that? What are the people who are actually there saying? So anyway, Zimmerman gives us 2 cents about Pan-Africanism, but we understand, like, whatever.
Yeah, because he said something about ambivalent Pan-Africanism, and
Right.
then he said, let me look at it.
What is
I don't want.
ambivalent Pan-Africanism? Ambivalent Pan-African. Ambivalent means what? You are undecided.
Right. It said first he said colonial Pan-Africanism. Then he's talked about ambivalent Pan-Africanism. And then he said, the last stage was radical, variants of Pan-Africanism. So I was like, okay. I said, maybe Doc maybe she'll unpack that when she comes on the show. Oh, Doc, I can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Can you
Okay.
hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry. Somebody was trying to call me. People. Anyway, um, he calls it a whole bunch of different names, but I hope that my position on it is very clear. From a humanist position, in terms of valuing human life, you have to understand that the human loss outweighed the strides. And so it is not Pan-Africanism. And once again, who is Zimmerman? He who defines controls. Okay, and so I do we need another person to define some things for us, like Harlan had done in the context of Washington's, editing or even organizing Washington's personal papers for the Library of Congress? No. But it is not Pan-Africanism. And he offers a couple of things up, but I guess his view of Pan-Africanism is something other than what ours would be.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
It cannot
And
be
I saw that.
It cannot be oppressive. It cannot be exploitative, right? And it has to address our condition, and there has to be some benefit to us, right? And so it's easily disqualified. But he holds it up because he's holding it up for the faction he comes from. He's a European person, and he's holding up for
Absolutely.
European culture.
And
Right.
and we have and that's one thing, Dr. Wright, that we have to understand when we're reading, the work of Europeans or the words of Europeans. And Dr.
Right.
Amos Wilson always told us, he said, read everything. But when we
Right.
do read it, we have to understand that they're seeing the world through the lenses of European people, right? They're viewing this through their cultural lens, whoever it is, whether it's someone African, whether it's somebody European. Your interpretation is based on your worldview, right? And so we have to be
Absolutely.
mindful. We have to be mindful of that when we pick up other books. So, family, today we discussed chapter 4 of Booker T. Washington in Africa by Dr. Tyrene Wright. She is the author. Family, please go to Booker T. Washington and Africa.com. Let me put here it is. I'm going to put the link in the chat. I'm going to put the link in the chat and also put it on the screen. All right. So please get your book. We sold out last time, family, and we can do it again. We can
Yes,
do
I
it
want to get
again.
rid of these books.
Yes,
You got
she ordered a whole bunch of them. She ordered a whole bunch of them,
yes.
family. So look,
Yes,
please,
yes,
please,
yes.
please make sure that you grab the book because we sold her out. She ended up, buying books, and I know, like I buy books too, Dr. Wright, and so I
Yes.
know that you probably bought 100 or 200 of them. So you're like, let me get this off. So family,
Yes.
make sure that you visit. Make sure that you visit Booker T. Washington and Africa.com. Mr. Untouchable, he said, will do. I got you, Doc. So make sure you get them. And maybe look,
Yes.
grab one or two of them and give them out to folks. Let's get this information, out to the people. All right, family.
I want
Let's
to
get
do a
this
Yes.
giveaway.
You gonna do a giveaway?
Yeah, so what we want to do is I want to make sure I gift the book to someone. So we'll talk about the specifics next show, and I want to
Okay.
purchase another book so I can give away to someone in our chat that's been following us.
I'll match you. I'll match you, bro.
Wonderful.
So whatever
Okay,
you do,
great.
I'll do the same thing. So join us back here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next Sunday, family. I came on 6 p.m. today because I'm getting ready to hop on another panel discussion. I'm actually 18 minutes late, but I just wanted to. This is a very important discussion to me. And I wanted to make
Thank
sure that
you.
we had it out. And so, family, join us back here next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we discuss chapter 5, the Liberian crisis. Okay, chapter 5,
Yes.
family. Doc, are you joining us or you don't know?
I might skip that one, but I will definitely be here for the African exclusion measure conversation.
That was
Important.
that's chapter 6 or chapter 7?
That's chapter 6 and the final which the 6th chapter is the last evidentiary chapter. So you all are about to go into the 2 evidentiary chapters, the 2 policy cases that essentially tell you, give you the details in the hardcore concrete cases that Washington is involved in as a Pan-Africanist. So now all of this is all prepared you and showed you his preparation for how he comes to be who he is. Now you're going to see him exhibit it, right? This is the action now. These chapters. So I probably won't be on next week. I'll try, but I probably won't make it in time. However, the chapter 6, I'm definitely going to be on because we need to talk.
Let's do it. Look, let's do it. So family, we'll see you back. We'll see you, next week, but I'm going live tomorrow because I was on a Fox panel discussion talking about, the topic was, is America a racist country? And it was just me and another professor. We're like, yes. And then they always find 2 people. They always find 2 folks that said, no, it's not a racist country.
Right.
It's not a racist country. So what I'm going to do is play tomorrow night around 7:00. I'm going to go live and play that discussion back and just review the conversation. So I'll be back live, family, tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If I don't see you, if I didn't catch you today, if you didn't see me today, you don't see me tomorrow, have a black-tastic week. Peace and Black power.